World of Tanks has been around for 10 plus years, and the standard 15 vs 15 format has continuously been a staple for the game, but it's nice to take a break from the random battle repetitiveness once in a while. Thankfully, there have been quite a handful of unique and ambitious game modes that have been released over the years to break up the monotony of random battles. There have been a plethora of good and bad game modes introduced over the years, and today we're taking a trip down the World of Tanks timeline. We'll be checking out all of the game modes that have been implemented throughout the history of the game, and we'll also be tossing a bit of fun into the mix by ranking them along the way. Before we get started on this chronological list of a dozen plus game modes, here are some things we won't cover. Obviously random battles, brawls or 7 vs 7, clan wars and variation of previous iterations like tank companies, mission marathons, recon missions, grand battles, and a few others. Most of these modes are readily available and don't offer us quite a unique experience or radically different gameplay. We'll be specifically looking at the PC version of the game, so console exclusives won't be on the list. As we talk about these modes, we'll be ranking them from best, S tier, to the worst, F tier. This will be based as objectively as possible by using some main points about each mode: the player-based reception of the mode at the time, the potential event rewards from playing the mode, the time to complete the mode's mission, if applicable, and the potential difficulty of performing well in the game mode. Let's get started. We begin the World of Tanks timeline journey all the way back to update 8.11, when the first unique game mode was unveiled, Confrontation. First live on February 12th of 2014, this mode was designed to pit nations of tanks against each other to reign supreme across an equal-tiered matchmaking system. The tank nation list was a bit more limited in Update 8.11, so nations like China and Japan were omitted from the event due to the lack of tank variety in their respective tech trees. Confrontation was very similar to the random battles mode, so there isn't too much to explain about it. The idea of having nations pit against each other like German versus America, or Russia versus French, was a neat opportunity to explore. There was a lot of potential behind the idea of confrontation, but it did become heavily one-sided depending on the tank matchups. Players were discovering, as predicted during the game mode's reveal, that it was quite unbalanced at times. This fact was even acknowledged on the update video made about the mode. The majority of most tiers being dominated by tanks that were best at their tier, like Shermans, T-29s, IS-3s, and Waffentrager E100s. That's not to say the game mode wasn't fun depending on the side you were on, especially just having the excitement of carrying your nation towards victory with your fellow tankers. Despite the potential, Confrontation only lasted for a few months. It was swiftly removed in less than 2 months in patch 9.0, a telling sign of how well this game mode was received back then. Another downfall is that it was only a potential to happen, much like Assault or Encounter or Grand Battles are today. It was not its own dedicated selection to choose to join. If Confrontation would return today, it would be quite interesting now that we have almost double the amount of tanks that there were back then. As for our ranking of Confrontation, we'll be placing this game mode in the C tier. While there were parts of the game mode that were fun, if you weren't on one of the stronger tanks or nations at the tier during 2014, you were at a disadvantage. There also wasn't any special income or rewards for this mode, just regular post-game XP and credits. A few months later, on April 1st, 2014, an April Fool's mode came to the game with great stride and a wicked throwback to make your classic video game nostalgia fluster. The Top Secret Tank event was an 8-bit styled game event starring the beloved Karl, the German self-propelled gun. This magnificent work of tank ingenuity was the star of the show. You and your friends could roll out in a 7 vs 7 battle that took place on its own 8-bit styled map, with destructible wall components, deep water areas, tall grass to hide in, and enemy bases. Karl was very fast, and had an amazingly speedy reload of 2 seconds, and, obviously, an artillery sniper mode. You received a special medal just for playing the mode. If you were able to finish in the top 5 players on your team, you'd receive 5,000 credits. This game mode was received so positively by the community upon release that the event was extended through the weekend instead of ending on Friday. The Karl game mode was simple, nostalgic, and was fun battle after battle. It gave players a fun break from the randoms during the April Fool's week and is dearly missed. The Karl event is a strong B-tier contender for the game mode's tier list. Its rating would have been higher if the mode had provided extra goodies like other future events would slowly start to incorporate. But for an April Fool's event, it was spectacular. Just a few weeks later, in mid-April of 2014, we were introduced to historical battles. These were brought to light with the 9.0 update. The Historical Battles game mode wanted to put players in as close to realistic battle situations as possible, such as the Battle of Kursk, Operations Spring Awakening, and more. This was different from the failed Confrontation mode that was a few months earlier by several different ways. Of the historical battles that were introduced, only the listed tanks that were in that battle could join to enter the queue to play in that battle. Each tank also required a specific loadout of shells. The main interest was the chance to change history by joining the nation that was defeated in that historical battle. The main issue from this game mode was that no one really played it. Historical Battles was a separate queue to join rather than just a potential to enter in randomly while playing battles, the direct opposite of how Confrontation game mode was implemented. The other wrinkle in the idea was that no one wanted to play in the lower tier tanks of the Historical Battle. Most players wanted to play in the Egg Tiger or the ISU 152 instead of the T-3485, for example. While the mode was really a cool concept and allowed players to perhaps learn a bit more about the historic premises of what took place during the war, the mode just fell flat. It was removed only a few updates later, mainly due to lengthy queue times. As for Historical Battles placement, we'll be putting it at C tier, and who knows if we'll ever see Historical Battles return to the game in the future. Just one major patch after that, version 9.1, brings us to our next game mode, Football. Take to the field in the T-62A Sport with two of your friends in a Rocket League-styled game. Take your tank, shoot the ball towards the goal, or shoot your enemy's track off to keep them in place. The first iteration of the game mode in June 2014 had a time limit of 7 minutes, or the first to 3 goals. On its first iteration, you were also given a gun-laying drive for winning 50 times in the game mode. You also got some extra XP that you could convert to free XP once the event was over. This mode turned out to be very well received by the community, so much so that 2 years later in 2016, we saw the return of Football mode once again, this time using a more decorated T-62A tank, a more colorful and defined field, and more rewards like boosters, different in-game medals, and more credits than previously in 2014. And just like a hat trick, Football mode returned for the third time in 2018 with its largest upgrade so far. This time you were able to pick from 3 tanks, the E100, the AMX 13105, and the Old Faithful T-62A. Each of them had adjusted statistics for the mode, as well as a special ability to use during the game. There were also a brand new emblems and styles that were able to be purchased in the in-game shop, or you could earn them by doing daily missions, which gave you football cards. You also had the opportunity to add a unique crew member to your barracks that came with 6 cents and could be put into any tank. They even made it possible to purchase the cards if you didn't have the time to spend in the month on the game mode. The Football mode was greatly enjoyed by the community, and provided so much fun to almost anyone who played it regardless of skill level. The rewards kept getting better and better each iteration that was introduced, and the tournaments for the mode added even more excitement. Players constantly ask about its return each year. A big point about Football is that players were not allowed to use equipment or consumables on the tank, making the mode purely about skill and not about paying to win. All these factors taken into consideration, Football mode will be placed in S tier. Let's hope in 2022 we'll see another amazing return of this well put together mode. Just a few patches later, we find ourselves in update 9.3 in late September of 2014, and it's time to take our tanks to the racetrack. Yes, you heard correctly, tank racing. The old map port was modified into a giant racing track with a fighting circle at the end of the circuit. You and 2 of your friends took to the track in modified Chaffee tanks and would face off against an opposing team to race to the finish line, while throwing shells at each other to knock off tracks or to deal some damage. The aim of the game was to either capture the base at the end or destroy the enemy tanks. This mode also had some nice rewards to go with it. A unique medal, credits, crew and tank XP, days of premium account, and garage slots. After the event, players rejoiced about the fun that was had during the event, and the player base had a very positive yearn for its return. After 5 long years of waiting, racing was back in World of Tanks. Update 1.6.1 brought us The Great Race. This was the spectacular successor that players from years ago were dreaming of. Aside from the Chaffee Sport, 2 other tanks, the Leopard and the T-50 Sport, were introduced. These tanks had unique features about them that allowed for more intricate strategies of mixing and matching the tank types with your teammates. Not only did the mechanics and gameplay of the event improve, but also the reward pool of the event skyrocketed. You could choose one of 3 teams to join, and by completing achievements through playing the game, you earned points towards a tournament total. Your points got you crew skins, credits, decals, emblems, gold, collection elements, Types 5 bonus games, 2D styles, and a unique commander at the end of the event. The downside for the Great Race event is that you couldn't go from race to race. You had a limited amount of races every few hours, as well as the game mode had a heavy leniency of wanting you to win races in order to gain the most of the game mode's special currency. All in all, the mode provided quite a lot of fun towards all players that participated in the mode, as well as provided some really unique rewards across the board. The Great Race was a really massive improvement on the already fun event from 5 years ago. This places the Great Race mode solidly in the A tier for our game modes tier list. As we move towards the early winter time of 2015, we find ourselves in mid-update 9.5, Enter the Winter Showdown mode. Much resembling the Karl mode earlier in the year, this 8-bit game mode was unique enough to make itself stand out. The map was even updated to have a 2015 winter feel to it. In Winter Showdown, you had 3 tanks to choose from: the Mammoth, the Polar Bear, and the Arctic Fox. Each of these tanks closely resembled tech tree tanks of their respective design of the T110E5, Foch 155, and the LTTB. The really neat part about this mode is that you had magic tank healing shells. You could shoot your allies in order to heal them and keep them in the game even longer. A really big interest in the mode was the staggering amount of XP and credits that were able to be earned in this mode. There were special missions to complete in order to get an amazing amount of experience, and these were repeatable. This made the mode an exceptional crew trainer for crews you already had, or perhaps a new crew you wanted to work on, or keep it for free XP conversion. Winter Showdown was a great mode to provide a lot of fun and benefit to all players that wanted to play in the mode. Its art style, music, and sound were another perfect nostalgic throwback. This is what allows the Winter Showdown to comfortably sit on A tier for the list. A simple mode with exceptional rewards. Probably one of the most ambitious projects for World of Tanks was the Rampage mode. This was a game mode with 2 sub-game modes. The first game mode, Domination, was added in Update 9.8. Domination specialized in the first game mode to use new tanks after the current one you were using was destroyed. You could pick up to 3 tanks to take into the mode. You also had flags to pick up and take back to the capture zones, and also repair zones to fully heal and rearm the tank you were in. The game was decided by victory points that were earned by capturing the flags, dealing damage, and destroying enemy tanks. In Update 9.9, Domination mode saw some updates, but also the second of 2 modes was added to Rampage, Steel Hunt. Steel Hunt was about every man or platoon for themselves. There were also battle reserves like Artillery Strike to use in both modes. These 2 modes also had the ability to have both Tier 10 down to Tier 8 tanks used in them. Although this caused heavy potential disparity in teams at times, when there were too many Tier 8s on one side and too many Tier 10s on the other side. This allowed for teams that were exceptionally strong to spawn camp the other team. Both Domination and Steel Hunt saw many variations and changes to make the gameplay more balanced and fair to all players. And during Update 9.12, a set of missions for Rampage mode appeared to get the elusive T-22 medium Russian Tier 10 tank. These missions were extremely difficult and required nothing short of an amazing game in order to complete the missions. There was a vast disparity in the community as players began rigging the matchmaking system of this mode in order to gain the tank. After many iterations and updates, the Rampage mode was slated to be removed in patch 9.15 around a year after the ideas were introduced. Overall, players' perception of the mode and its updates were rather poor, which led to an even further decline of players going into the game mode. This heavily complex mission requirements to earn an over-tuned Russian medium tank also caused great amount of conflict. Overall, this ambitious project turned out to be a heavy flop. Placing Rampage game mode in the F tier seems fitting for all the interesting engagements across the community that it caused. Tracking back a bit to the mid 9.14 update, we find ourselves in April 2016. Another very fun April Fool's event was developed, Moon Mayhem. This featured IS-8 ball tanks that took to space and are headed towards the moon. The map layout was one that resembled a billiards table with 6 pockets of lava. The objective for this mode was simple: destroy enemy tanks, and especially by pushing them into the deep pockets of lava that were on the edges of the map. You could shoot enemy tanks to do a little damage and a good amount of knockback, but even heavier knockback was done by ramming other tanks to push them into the pools of lava. There was also random events that occurred, like meteors that struck the ground, and impulses that sent all tanks flying in a random direction. There were some small rewards for this mode, such as some extra XP to earn for free XP conversion, a small amount of credits for destroying an enemy tank, and boosters for crew and tank XP. Moon Mayhem was another successful April Fool's mode that allowed for fun by all to be had during the game mode's availability. Moon Mayhem will be placed at B tier for the list. A really great mode, but a little bit lacking in the rewards criteria for our specific scoring. We turn our attention now to Update 9.16. The 100 Years of Tank Celebration event was starting to heat up and was celebrated with a new game mode called Convoy. Starring the Mark I tank, you and your teammates drove around the battlefield in the first ever wheeled vehicles in World of Tanks. Players took control of their Lanchester armored car with fast-firing machine guns in order to guide the Mark I towards its destination, or opposingly, destroy it before it made it there. Players were able to drive around and pick up explosives and repair kits on the battlefield in order to help or hinder the Mark I tank and bring their team closer to victory. You also had the ability to have special power-ups to collect like a faster firing machine gun, or a gun that could instantly eliminate an opposing wheeled vehicle. There were medals, credits, XP, and personal reserves to earn for playing and winning this game mode. Some tankers will say this was the event that was disguised as the original testing ground for the implementation of future wheeled vehicle line of the EBR 105. Convoy was another very cool game mode from the developers and very nicely implemented. The gun upgrades and different paths the Mark I could take through the map allowed for gameplay to not be too repetitive quickly throughout the time the mode was available. Overall, Convoy game mode has a great place in the B tier, although others would like to claim it should be lower due to its wheeled implications for the future. A whole year later, during update 9.19, a new game mode is introduced that is our first of continuously recurring game modes, Ranked. This update brought in a beta season of the mode. Most of the key features were implemented upon launch, such as tier 10 only, chevrons, and the opportunity to have similar skilled matchmaking. In the early days, there were 4 stages in a single season of Ranked that would last for 1 week each. Each of those stages needed a certain number of chevrons to reach the 6 ranks. You had to finish in the top 12 on a winning team and the top 3 on a losing team to gain a chevron. The birth of ranked battles also gave light to brand new game currency called bonds, and with it brought bond equipment. In 2018, rank changed once again in the chevron structure and the rank ladder climb. Now the introduction of earning 2 chevrons for the top 3 players in XP was introduced, as well as the 1 gained for being at the top of the XP for the losing team. The introduction of rank shields and more rewards like bonds and credits to gain along the way were also added. In 2019, we saw rank evolve closely to what it is today, with the introduction of gold, silver, and bronze leagues, as well as the addition of qualification and divisions 1 through 3, with 10 ranks in each of those divisions. Bonus battles were also introduced to help speed along your progress by doubling your chevrons upon gaining chevrons. Specific roles for tanks to earn boosted experience, such as high caliber support, light attack vehicle, etc., were also added to all tanks. 2019 also introduced the first Tier 9 reward tank, the Kampfpanzer 50T, for those players that could perform well enough to earn enough points to earn the tank. 2020 brought the same idea to the table, but now a certain Tier 10 reward tanks and non-tech tree tanks were not allowed to participate in ranked any longer. This made playing the battles at higher ranked in leagues more even for players. 2021's ranked season also brought along some changes as well. It introduced a new Tier 10 reward tank, the 114 SP2. The battle format was also changed to 10 vs 10 instead of a 15 vs 15, after a beta season of a few months previously proved positive of this change. Ranked has been ongoing in the game for quite some time and still has quite mixed reviews by players across all skill levels. Unlike the more fun game modes that have been in the game over the years, this one is quite competitive, but the rewards are potentially very crucial and powerful to have for higher skilled gameplay. The ranked game mode will be placed in the B tier on the list, if only for the amount of bonds, credits, and other rewards that can be won playing the mode. As the weather outside cools down in the fall of 2017, update 9.20.1 in October brings us our first Halloween game mode, Stop the Leviathan. The monstrosity of the afterlife, the Leviathan, is hungry for more tanks to invade the overworld. Now it's up to you and 6 of your friends to take on the giant tank and defeat him once and for all. In this mode, you could choose between Franken and Stein, 2 tanks quite unique from each other, but both boast the special mechanic of having 2 turrets. This mode also had a really neat point of having the choice to play PvE game mode versus the Leviathan, or a PvP game mode with the typical 15 vs 15 makeup. The PvE mode is the real star of this Halloween special. You and your team need to work your way around Karkarov that's been heavily drugged down into the underworld in order to defeat the Leviathan before he reaches the portal to the main world. There are other AI-controlled tanks that are rolling around the field that when killed, drop health packs to heal yourself and your team whenever you drive over them. Players just have to be careful, as the Leviathan was a powerful enemy with devastating firepower. If you weren't careful and were caught in front of its gun, it could spell disaster quickly. There were also a lot of rewards to be gained through this game mode. There were dozens of missions to complete both daily and weekly in order to earn sarcophaguses to open that could contain credits, boosters, consumables, and equipment just by playing this really spooky game mode. Fear of falling into the depths of the underworld aside, Stop the Leviathan was packed with a bunch of fun and fantastic rewards that could easily be earned by most players that were interested. All these factors easily put Stop the Leviathan at nothing short of A tier. We've reached a pivotal point on the World of Tanks timeline. It's time for update 1.0. This brought along a whole big celebration and massive updates to the game, even a brand new April Fool's mode, Battle Royale. This game mode launched seemingly out of nowhere after being teased and leaked on the forums during the week of April 1st. This game mode required its own game client to install and was only available for 1 day. Quite a short window to try and take in all this game mode had to offer. There's barely any information about all the points of this early game mode across the World of Tanks news sources as well. This took points from the Steel Hunt mode, part of the failed Rampage mode that was introduced so many years ago. This mode had you spawn in a select few Tier 9 light tanks while fighting your way against 39 other enemies on a large 9km by 9km map, Normandy. Over the course of the battle, sections of the map would slowly be closed off in order to drive the remaining players closer to each other. When you spawned, you had very little ammunition. You needed to find and drive over supply drops in order to gain more. There were also many various upgrades around the map that could give you various crew skills, equipment, or consumables. You could even have the luck of being the first to an air supply drop in order to get a big boost to your tank. These could give you a massive advantage in your quest to become that lone tank standing. There were opportunities to heal your tank with supply drops, and you even have the ability to upgrade to tier 10 tanks if you were able to find the specific area to do so. The other new mechanic to this mode was the spotting system. It was completely changed to where now you had to be pointing your mouse at an enemy in order to see the tank type and HP. You even had to be facing your turret in the general direction of the tank in order to even see them unless they came into your proximity spotting range. Since this mode was just a very early test mode, as well as its own game client, there were not any rewards to gain from this mode. The games were also very fast-paced if you did not have a great spawn or found a big group of tanks that suddenly turned towards you. Barring all the other features that were seemingly unbalanced due to this being an early test, the mode was a decently put together proof of concept of how a battle royale could be done. For what went into the game mode's development, there was some decent fun that was to be had during the day or two this game mode was available. For how quick the game mode was here and gone, plus there wasn't much to gain from this mode, it belongs at the C tier for the game mode's tier list. We move forward just 1 month later to May 2018, and the hype for a 1.0 update of the game isn't over yet. We're introduced to another new game mode that made its way to establishing itself as a permanent recurring part of the game, Frontlines. Frontlines didn't just come out of nowhere though. A year earlier, Frontlines began in a sandbox test server. This was to be a whole new game mode, doubling the player count on one massively scaled up map. The sandbox had most of the features and map design we're used to today, the biggest change being that it used to be tier 10 tanks at the time of testing. A year later, when Frontlines was ready to be introduced into the main game, it remained the 30 vs 30 on a huge 9km by 9km map. But this time it was exclusives to tier 8s. What's more interesting is that it had a few hints of the old Rampage mode that we saw fail many years ago. The consumables like Artillery Strike and Air Strike returned to be able to be used by all players in this game mode, as well as other new combat reserves to try out. The teams were split into attacking team and defending team. While the attacking team moved forward down 3 separate lines to capture 2 sets of bases on each line, the defending team attempted to prevent them from doing so. The successful capturing of bases added more time to the total game time, and will allow players to reach the 5 main turrets stationed in the back of the map. If the attacking team is able to destroy 3 out of the 5 turrets, the attacking team would win. There were also repair areas that can re-equip and fully repair any tanks that drive into the zone and wait a certain amount of time. There was even a respawn mechanic that allowed you to take a new vehicle when the one you were in was destroyed. The main rewards for this mode were earned the better your performance was during battle. Reducing capture points, doing damage, assistance, and kills all counted towards you moving up in the ranks in battle from private to general. You also made progress through tiers of Frontline mode, which awarded the players credits, consumables, boosters, medals, and days of premium. The biggest factor for most players is due to being able to potentially push upwards of 10,000 plus combined damage. You were able to gain credits and experience like crazy, allowing you to massively boost your tech tree tier 8s quicker than ever before, and taking premium tanks into the battle to put your profits right through the roof. All of these factors that were well received by the community allowed Frontline to continue returning for the next year in 2019, where they had a more in-depth progression chart while working towards 2 new tanks, the Emil 1951 and the AE Phase 1. In 2020, Frontlines was part of the Expedition game mode and allowed players to grind towards more new Tier 9 tanks like the Scharfenberg 4. In 2021, Frontlines continues to be an amazing game mode for players to partake in, as it's now part of the Battle Pass system. Frontlines really made a great impression over the years and allows most tankers to take advantage of the substantial credit and experience boost. Its continued return each year is welcomed with open arms, as players can't wait to take to the battlefield in this massive 30 vs 30 mode. Frontlines deserves nothing less than being placed in the A tier for our game mode's tier list. We continue our journey down the timeline and find ourselves in mid-update 1.3. Halloween is here again and a new game mode is released, Dark Front. Green matter needs to be collected from Grim Nettleberg, and it's up to you and your team of Dark Runners in your modified MT-25s in order to run around and collect it. And that was it. There were some armored vehicles that would resurrect from the grave if you got too close to them and started to shoot at you. These tanks had hit bars instead of hit points, so each tank type took a certain amount of penetrations to destroy them. There were also some random power-ups on the ground that you could get to power up you and your team to help destroy the tanks and collect green matter faster. Aside from that, the main reward system of the game mode was collecting more and more matter each day in order to level up your progress bar 13 levels. Each level gave you a further increase in a percentage boost on XP, credits, and free XP while playing random battles. This would have been great, but the conditions for meeting them were limited to 1 rank per day, and the green matter requirements as you went higher were way overtuned. There were some missions to do to gain some credits and other small rewards, but none after the battle. You only gained the unique 2D style after reaching the 13th level. You could also buy your way to the 13th level with gold as well, which continued to decline in price each day. Compared to previous game modes and the previous year's Halloween mode, this one fell flat. There wasn't too much action going on other than driving around quickly and occasionally taking on some of the enemies with your teammates. The rewards also weren't as great as what they could be, and most players got tired of the mode after just a few battles. The game mode was fun to a particular niche of players out there, but overall, this mode belongs in the C tier for the World of Tanks game mode ranking list. With the game making so much progress over the years, wouldn't it be nice just to go back to the beginning and start all over again? Well, during mid-update 1.4.1, the World of Tanks team had created a whole dedicated server to relive the days of version 0.70 and called it World of Tanks Classic. Quite an interesting approach to the 2019's April Fool's joke. This whole separate server download was a direct copy of how the game used to be back in the day, starting with the fact that there were only 3 tech trees in the game: Russia, Germany, and America, and even these trees were quite limited in the tanks that could be researched. The only tier 10s at the time were the E100, Mouse, T30, and IS-7. There was no Sixth Sense as you know it today. The physics were so limited that you could hang off cliffs and could not push dead tanks around, which also means you could not be flipped over as well. There was general chat, and you couldn't even buy gold ammunition without spending actual gold currency. During the event, you were credited with some XP, credits, and gold in order to quicken your progress through the tech tree to enjoy as many tanks as you could. There are so many things that held a nostalgia trip for many seasoned players when logging in and playing on the test server. It was a 100% accurate representation of what the game was like all those years ago in 2011. By playing on the server, you were awarded a cool Dog 0.70 2D style for any tank on your main World of Tanks account. There's not too much more to say about this special dedicated server that was available for roughly a week. It was a picture-perfect image of what the game was like all those years ago. For some players, it was a wonderful week of nostalgia tripping by platooning mismatched tier tanks, taking platoons of multiple artillery, or just racing around in their derpy-gunned light tanks. The experience was thrilling for most, and it was quite a fun experience for all players involved that played on the Classic server. This allows us to put World of Tanks Classic mode comfortably on the A tier for the game modes tier list. A really nice throwback from the World of Tanks team. A few months later, we look at mid-update 1.5.1, where we were introduced to another PvE game mode, Homefront. Homefront was about you and your team taking on waves of AI tanks and preventing them from reaching your base area. There were 2 fronts to play on, the Eastern and Western Front, each with 3 different divisions to play as well, giving you a total of 6 different lines to play as. You had the opportunity to level up each of those different divisions to level 3 to maximize their effectiveness in battle with different special abilities. You did get a few respawns of vehicles, but you could only use each vehicle once. Ammunition points were provided on the map to replenish your team's ammo when you got low. Various waves of tanks would spawn for you and your team to defeat, getting more difficult to defeat each passing wave. Teams needed to have really good teamwork in order to have a good chance at defeating some of the higher level waves that potentially came up. This game mode had quite the unique end rewards though. By getting to level 2 of each of the 6 divisions, you were able to earn some directives and 2D styles for your tanks. When you reached level 3, you gained equipment for each of the 6 divisions as well. If you were skilled enough to complete one or both the Eastern and or Western fronts, you were rewarded with a piece of bond equipment for each front completed. The major drawback of playing this game mode was that it was limited to how many times you could play. This was limited based on the amount of fuel that you had. It could be earned by ranking up divisions, playing missions in random battles, or waiting another day for a resupply of a couple of fuel. Even if you played very well in all of your games, the max amount of fuel possible to earn versus what was needed to complete the entirety of the mode was close to impossible. You could also purchase division levels for gold, but this added a few other layers of complication since you could be still matched up with Division 1 players and not have strong enough tanks to complete a whole segment. Homefront was a very high-risk, high-reward event. It was very criticized by its fuel cost in order to play, as well as the discrepancy of the mismatching of division levels for those who paid gold to level up straight away. Due to the early nature of the AI of the waves of the game mode, it did fall a bit on the repetitive side early on, especially when you needed 50 games or more to start getting close to completing the entire event. Homefront belongs on the C tier for this list. Rewards were potentially great, but the grind and discrepancies dragged it from being placed higher. Just a short time later, during Update 1.6, we see the return of a game mode thought lost to time with a slight name change. Steel Hunter has finally returned to World of Tanks, completely revamped and changed to become a real Battle Royale mode. Much different than the previously failed Steel Hunt mode, and taking a lot of pointers from the feedback from the Battle Royale April Fool's mode, Steel Hunter comes to the game with plenty of new opportunities. As your main goal of being the last man standing, you could now choose from 3 total customized and upgradable tanks: the Rattlesnake, Red Dawn, and Flammenschwert. The main progression in-game was to collect drop points that contained ammo or consumables in order to level up your tank from Tier 1 to Tier 7. You did this by selecting from one of 2 possible upgrade points during each tier upgrade. Everything from mobility, alpha damage, and armor structure could be slightly tweaked to your playstyle. A great point was that all crews and tanks in this game mode were exactly the same, so your real advantages came down to skill and map awareness, which, by the way, kept the same style from the original Battle Royale by slowly shrinking over time. They even kept the vision system from Battle Royale in Steel Hunter, which means you needed to be even more attentive to the things going on around you. Recovery zones, airstrikes, turbocharger, and other unique abilities really added to the game experience and 1v1 fights that could make or break your way to the top. During this iteration, Steel Hunter was treated almost like a ranked game mode. There were 25 ranks to progress through, each with a number of chevrons that were required to earn before you going to the next rank. You could even lose chevrons if your performance was underwhelming during the battle. That's not to say this mode wasn't without its rewards though. Each rank provided bonds, credits, and other useful in-game items to use in random battles. In 2020, Steel Hunter joined Frontlines in a combined event called Expedition. Does this remind you anyone of anything? Rampage? This time, there was a whole new map introduced, Arzagir 4.04, which had a bit more open areas to play around in rather than a heavy city of Dreamland. There were also brand new tanks introduced, including a rework of the already existing tanks in the game: the Raven, Valkyr, Varieg, Harbinger Mark IV, and the Arlequin, all with unique roles, consumables, and abilities. Even the commanders of each nation had their own special skills and perks different from most of the other choices. Since Steel Hunter was a part of Expeditions, the ways to progress through the levels and the rewards for each individual level were tweaked. There were instead points to earn, as this mode was the second half to getting those exclusive tanks at the time. In 2021, Steel Hunter continued to return in World of Tanks at the beginning of the year with just some minor tweaks and balance changes. This time it was included as part of the Battle Pass, so the rewards for playing the mode were not as great, and there was more incentive to play the mode for the extra Battle Pass points they provided. Steel Hunter continues to return to World of Tanks year after year. The experience is unique enough, and a good number of players enjoy the mode's return each year. Not to say it doesn't have a few flaws. Arguments about making some tanks being overtuned in the right hands, spawns can potentially be too clustered, and just unlucky drops could hinder one's experience with the mode. Overall, Steel Hunter is going to fall into the B tier for our game mode's tier list. The rewards from its first iteration were much greater than what they currently are now, and its potentially luck-based nature are holding it back from being placed higher on the list. As we move towards the turn of the decade, World of Tanks turns 10 years old, and so begins a long celebration of the game. Coincidentally, it's been 75 years since the Great Victory in Europe, and thus was celebrated in a game with the Road to Berlin event. 5 players took to the battlefield in timed segments in attacking or defending against enemy vehicles of increasing difficulty. Initially, 3 tanks were available to use at the start of the encounter. The player would gradually gain 2 more if your team continued to progress through the segments in the battle. There were 5 unit types in order to take part in the final assault to bring Europe victory. Those were the Winged Spearheads, the Beast Slayers, the Ironside, 1st Tank Battalion, and the 48th Breakthrough Regiment. Each one had its own unique tanks to use, as well as their own special abilities that could help you and your allies get out of tough situations. Each time you would take a specific unit to battle, you gained points in order to level that unit from 1 to level 3. Sound familiar? This level increase also gave access to more powerful vehicles and more powerful abilities to use during battle. There were some creative changes to well-known maps, and some new ones specifically designed for this game mode. There was even a Berlin map that made a return for this mode that would become available as a map for the random battles queue. Playing on this map also gave players triple their points to further boost their progress. After each battle, you received victory points based on your performance in the battle. This was used to reach new unit levels and operation stages. Progress through these levels for unit and event completion was made easier due to your first battle of the day being multiplied by 5. If you played through missions for random battles, you could earn a couple of times 15's tokens to use before you went into the battle. There was also an option to purchase times 10 tokens for gold to boost your progress further. The progression goal was to work through the 5 stages of victory points. Each of the first 4 stages gave players a 25% discount on the new IS-2 shielded tank and some crew books. The 5th and final stage's prize was a bounty ventilation system and a special medal. The mode had some neat opportunities for fun with other players. Some of the units were weaker than others just based on the special abilities alone, but not weak enough that they were unplayable. This mode was nicely laid out for players of most skill levels, with an ending prize that was decently feasible to achieve. Aside from the craziness that was the fast-firing Wesps with laser accuracy, the mode was enjoyed by most of the community. Unfortunately, there were no post-match rewards like credits or XP, so the only rewards to obtain were after each main progression that we were able to achieve. As for its result, Road to Berlin lands itself on the B tier for the game mode tier list. Years ago, there was a winter-themed map that existed up until patch 9.5, Servergoysk. Hidden in one of the garages was the legendary Strumtiger. Dreamed about becoming a reality by tankers, the time has finally come. During the Act anniversaries, in celebration of 10 years of World of Tanks, we arrive in Update 1.9.1. Act 3 began and introduced Crouching Strumtiger. The Strumpanzer IV Strumtiger was brought to life with some monstrous statistics. This 10v10 exclusive mode took place on a select few small maps and lasted for only a week. The tank was very fast, fired super quickly, and was pretty great to be in a platoon with your friends just driving around throwing shells at other tanks. It also had some very special ammunition, as one would expect for such a high caliber cannon. It was capable of firing heat and high explosive shells. Heat was able to do 7,000 points of damage. The only downside? An abysmal 100 meters per second shell velocity. HE shells did 3,000 points of damage but could travel twice as fast. You weren't able to earn any credits or XP for this game mode, but you were able to earn some cool emblems, decals, inscriptions, a medal, and anniversary coins to use for a special shop that was available during the 10 years event for World of Tanks. There's not really much more to say about this game mode. The concept was quite simple, and speeding around with its 380mm cannon was great fun. It's really cool that World of Tanks was able to give a small glimpse of what this tank would potentially be like if it was put into the game. Its simplicity and ease to earn rewards allow this mode to be placed on the A tier for the game mode's tier list. While most tankers were busy enjoying the celebration of many years of World of Tanks, one genius was putting together a super weapon, one of mass destruction, superior armor, and devastating firepower. Max von Krieger, a genius German scientist that deserted from the Alliance, created a tank born from fears and driven by nightmares. The Waffentrager E100 lives again and is ready to show the world its true power. During mid-update 110, World of Tanks brings back the most devastating tank destroyer of all in a new game mode called the Last Waffentrager. Max von Krieger, who was von Hoffman in the Steel Hunter game mode, has left the Alliance in order to form his super weapon unsupervised. It's up to a Harrier squad of 7 players in electromagnetically modified T-55 Thunderbolts to bring him down. Each one of these Harriers had equipment to absorb this electrical energy being used by Max in order to power up their tank to improve their gun damage capabilities. There was also a charge mode that heavily increased the horsepower and top speed of the tank, allowing you to move very quickly across the battlefield. The Thunderbolt tanks also had 3 lives, which allowed for quick respawning if your vehicle was destroyed. There were 3 maps that were tweaked to fit the mode the players would partake in: Studzianki, Fisherman's Bay, and Redshire. Packs of Sentinels would spawn on the map that the Harriers would need to destroy. When the Harriers were successful at destroying a group of them, the last one would drop an energy pack to absorb to heal HP and increase damage of the gun for all allies. Each pack of Sentinels would also be increasingly difficult to defeat, up to the last pack consisting of Mouses and E100s. If this sounds easy, a rude awakening is coming. The Waffentrager is there, hunting you down to stop your mission to bring his research to an end. The Waffentrager is even more powerful than before. It's equipped with a 4-shot autoloader boasting 700 alpha damage, with 5 seconds between each clip. To make it even scarier, its full reload was only 12.5 seconds. Its almost non-existent gun dispersion made it devastatingly accurate on the move and could easily snipe weak points if it stopped to aim for a few seconds. It also boasted 2 special abilities, an EMP arrow that could severely stun your tank and slowed you down, and an EMP burst that charged up for a few seconds, then heavily damaged the tank in close proximity while stunning the rest. The list of massive buffs doesn't end there. The Waffentrager came stacked with a whopping 32,000 hit points and an energy shield that could barely be penetrated while the Harriers don't have enough energy collected. You can't even track the Waffentrager. This tank was truly monstrous. Even more exciting is that this wasn't just a PvE game mode. The spawn-in Sentinels were controlled by AI and were relatively easy to destroy, but the Waffentrager was driven by another player. You never know what type of strategy you'll run into from game to game, keeping you and your team of Harriers on your toes. Coordinating with each other was the only way to ensure victory. In order to play in the Waffentrager, there were special missions to complete in random battles, and in the Harriers to earn special keys. These keys could also be purchased in the premium shop with bundles for special footlockers. When you would complete missions in the Waffentrager and in the Harriers, you'd earn Engineers and Harriers footlockers respectively. You could get credits, personal reserves, garage slots, demount kits, consumables, and days of premium account. These footlockers also had unique feature of re-rolling the contents if you were not happy with what you were going to receive in the locker. They also could contain a collection of items such as decals, emblems, crew skins, and 2D styles to use on any tank. Gaining a collection piece added to a total progression for the event. Completing a certain amount of the progression rewarded keys and bonds. There was even an opportunity to encounter a special variation of the Waffentrager that was driven by World of Tanks community contributors. Defeating these tanks would give each player a special footlocker. After 2 weeks of the event, the Last Waffentrager was over, and Max von Krieger and his Waffentrager were defeated. Or so we thought. Just when you thought you've seen the last Waffentrager, no one was prepared for the return of the Waffentrager. In 2021, Max von Krieger is back, and he's learned from his mistakes. He and his Waffentrager return with vengeance. This time, the Waffentrager has become much more in tune with the electromagnetic side of science, boasting a massive railgun. His newfound research has also given his tank the ability to teleport across the map. But he's not the only one who's furthered their technological state. The Alliance has beefed up their arsenal and now has 3 unique tanks to take on the Waffentrager: the Resistor, the Thunderbolt, and the Foudre. Each one equipped with a powerful railgun, but each having their own unique ability to aid the Harrier squad in taking down von Krieger's improved vehicle of destruction. There were also 3 totally new maps introduced in the 2021 version: Moravanka, Steppes, and Siegfried Line. The Waffentrager has a constant shield surrounding him, being powered by generators that teleport to different locations on the map. The Harriers team still needs to go around the map and destroy the pack of Sentinels in order to pick up plasma, but this time the tank who picked up the plasma will get a boost to their damage on their shells. Not only that, but the main point is to take it to the generators in order to overload the circuits to disrupt the shield surrounding the Waffentrager. Each overload of plasma will do some small damage to von Krieger, as well as reduce the overall shield percentage by 25%. When 4 generators are overloaded, the shield drops completely and you'll be able to hit von Krieger with everything you've got. 2021's variation kept the collector's bundles and had a few new decals, emblems, and 2D styles. This time it came with the voiced commanders to add to your collection, even the Herr Engineer himself. Both years' events heavily encouraged teamwork and strategy in order to bring down the rightfully overpowered tank destroyer, but this led to players being a bit disgruntled at the mode, as there were times where you would not succeed for quite a number of games due to players not working together. Sometimes there would be long queue times for the Harriers, but this is solved by Matchmaker offering players in the queue free E100 keys to balance out the number of tanks. Otherwise, the rewards from the collection and battle to battle are fairly good in this mode and can be quite satisfying, especially when playing in the E100. Overall, this game mode is great to show how an overpowered tank and over-engineered tank of destruction could potentially wreak havoc if unleashed on the world. These factors place the Waffentrager game mode at A tier for our game mode tier list. We'll have to wait and see if the Alliance has finally defeated Max von Krieger once and for all, or is this just the beginning of his plan to grow his tank even stronger. World of Tanks keeps its foot to the floor during 2020. Just a few weeks later, a new Halloween event was introduced, Mirny 13. Greatly inspired by the Chernobyl series, Hans Geiger, and most importantly the Silent Hill games, Myrni 13 was the first PvE game mode to have a heavier reliance on a lore-driven story. Even Masahiro Ito, the art director from Silent Hill 2, and Akira Yamaoka, the chief sound producer from Silent Hill games, helped worked on this amazing clash between World of Tanks and a parallel world that Miriam, a newly discovered material, had created. Players would join a team of 4 others in Myrni-modified vehicles: the Hornet, Cerberus, Goliath, Malachite, and the Grenadier were available choices for the player to take into the eerie landscape. Each tank could be equipped with a set of consumables, allowing you to freely customize any tank to further benefit your playstyle and your team while you venture deeper into the landscape. There were even anomalies that would occasionally drop from enemies that could power up your vehicle in order to aid your mission of returning home. Myrni 13 was a heavily modified version of Ghost Town, and while it may look familiar, it's clearly gone through some events. These events involved a newfound material: Miriam. The player's job is to bring enough Miriam to the collector before the time runs out. When the collector is filled, players would progress to a more difficult phase. The map would change slightly, the atmosphere would become more eerie, and the view range would decrease for each phase change. In order to find and collect Miriam, players needed to fight their way through the map and destroy AI-driven enemies. These enemies would drop Miriam. The enemies had various roles and various tanks depending on which level of difficulty you were playing on and what phase you were in. There were hedgehogs that would explode on your tank, rabbits that would run away and try and pull you from the group, guards in order to keep you from progressing further, alphas and mosquitoes that could devastate your tank if not dealt with quickly, and hunters that once they have you in their sights will never stop chasing you down. Worst of all, the Immortal, a relentless machine of certain destruction that is to be feared, an impenetrable double-barreled, surrounded by fiery aura death machine that will slowly chase after you, steal your Miriam and your hit points. You needed to stay away from this horrible nightmare at all costs. If you're not so lucky and do end up getting destroyed, you still may have another chance to continue. If your teammates fill the collector and go to the next stage, you would be brought back to continue fighting. You would only return with 50% of your hit points though, so you need to be even more cautious as you fight on. During your travels through Myrni 13, you could also be lucky enough to pick up white testimonials. These would contain short paragraphs and backstory. You could use these testimonials in order to piece together what occurred to lead to the events of Myrni 13. After your treacherous journey through Myrni 13 with your team, you would be rewarded based on how many phases you got through and the amount of Miriam you collected. The higher the difficulty completed, the more credits and XP you would earn. The amount of Miriam you collected was converted into Commander XP. This was used for leveling up the commander of that certain tank. This also allowed you to make progress by earning coins for each level the commander reached. These coins could be turned in to obtain directives, personal reserves, training books, and the 3D styles for the tanks used, as well as a special event crew member with enough XP to have 3 skills. Since Myrni 13 was a highly toxic area to the commanders in the tanks, players needed to use stimulants in order to refresh the commanders of the tanks in order to continuously enter the mode. Stimulants were earned through random battle missions as well as Myrni 13 specific missions. You could also purchase stimulants using credits, but each one purchased per day increased the price. You could also earn a commander experience boosters by completing missions or purchasing them with gold in order to speed up your progress in earning coins. As more and more tanks and commanders went into the fray of Myrni 13, hope was becoming more and more bleak on how to deal with the monstrosities that inhabited the strange dimension of Myrni, until Hope herself had a breakthrough in research and had finally found a way. In 2021, Myrni 13 returned, this time titled Myrni Hope. The basic gameplay was kept in the 2021 version, but this time there were 2 new tanks added to the lineup. The Progetto 66 and IS-32 heavy tanks were added to the selection of playable vehicles. There was also a change to consumables that you could take. New ones included life stealing, instantly setting vehicles on fire, and instant damage. There were also a few minor enemy changes, such as the playable Goliath has now become a part of the enemy tanks, in addition of the large and terrifying Alpha Hedgehog. One of the best changes that came to Myrni Hope was that there were no more stimulants to use. You could continuously keep playing the game mode as many times as you wanted. But the most challenging change of Myrni Hope was taking on the Immortal itself. When playing on medium or high difficulty, and were successful in making it to the 4th final phase, your team was teleported to a different blocked-in area of the map, where your team would attempt to take down the Immortal himself. Just like in Stop the Leviathan, the Immortal gained a few glowing weak spots that could be penetrated by most rounds. Your team needed to work quickly doing damage to the Immortal, while also dealing with spawned groups of tanks that came along with it. Once you defeated the Immortal in the first phase, there was a brief pause, and the Immortal would return one last time. Once the Immortal's health was brought down to 0 in this phase, it would be defeated, and the team successfully has beaten the Immortal once and for all. Or at least that's what it seems to be for now. The rewards for Myrni Hope were changed in 2021. A collection of 8 reels now needed to be unlocked. Each reel was unlocked after beating a certain phase on each of the 3 difficulties for the mode. These reels contained short videos on how it was discovered that the Immortal could be destroyed. Some of them also contained boosters, crew members, decals, premium time, and special tanks to unlock like the Progetto 66, T-49, and T-54. After each game that you played in Mirny Hope, your performance in battle would award you with a different amount of decryption keys that were needed to unlock each of the 8 reels. Once all 8 reels were unlocked using decryption keys, the final prize was a special badge and a King Tiger captured premium tank with a special Mirny-inspired 3D style, and a secret video as well. Mirny 13 was a massive undertaking of a Halloween mode by the developers. Interestingly, Mirny 13 was actually supposed to take place in 2019, but got delayed due to a texture of oil causing the game to crash for a large number of players during testing. There's so much background story and interesting points that went into Mirny 13 that it's almost like its own game. The whole atmosphere and lore was well brought together and enjoyed by a great number of players. One of its downfalls being that when it comes to PvE game modes that heavily rely on coordination and teamwork, sometimes you can get an unlucky streak of games where players don't work together. All that being said, Mirny deserves nothing less than A tier on the game mode tier list. As we move to the end of our game mode timeline, we take a final stop in late January of 2021. The Order of War game mode was going to be released on the Sandbox test server. Order of War is set to resemble that of a top-down RPG-styled gameplay, where 7 tankers are facing one strategist, who has 7 tanks under their belt. The strategist commands all tanks, or he can choose to pilot one tank at a time. The strategist also has the ability to place structures that deal damage, or spot enemy vehicles as they approach the base, such as pillboxes and watchtowers. The maps used are ones that we are familiar with and have a typical win condition. Only Tier 10 vehicles were allowed to be selected and used for this mode, but there were restrictions on the amount of tank types you were able to choose from. So far, Order of War has not had any other release information after the iteration of the early sandbox, so we'll have to see what the plans are for this game mode down the road. But it will be something to look forward to as it gets developed, and will gain a rightful spot on the game modes tier list. This concludes our journey through the history of all the unique World of Tanks game modes that have occurred over the 11-year span of the game. There have been so many great and not so great variations of game modes. Here's a review of where each game mode sits on the list. Remember that this list was put together as objectively as possible using the player feedback, potential rewards, difficulty, and other specific data about the game modes covered. If you have a specific game mode that was your favorite, a mode that was listed too high or too low based on other data not covered in this video, or anything else you'd like to leave in the comments below, feel free to do so. Any feedback is always appreciated. If World of Tanks continues to add more unique or different game modes in the future, we'll certainly have to revisit and update the list accordingly. If you want to catch more World of Tanks action, be sure to head over to twitch.tv/predict_chaos, where I stream quite often and would love to see you guys there. Don't forget to rate what you thought about this video, and thanks so much for watching. See you next time!